Here's what's coming on this episode. I'm going to teach you how to not be emotionally connected to your property, which leads to bad decisions as a landlord. Tune in. All right, welcome to another episode of the Accidental Landlord podcast. I'm Peter McKenzie. I am flying solo today. So today we're going to talk about a subject that I'm passionate about that is the root of a lot of problems when it comes to landlords and tenants. And not even just tenants, landlords and their properties, landlords and maintenance. It pretty much permeates everything, every part of the experience you have as a landlord. And that is this: nothing good comes from an emotional connection to a rental property. This is a mindset problem. This isn't a financial problem. This isn't you don't have enough money so you can't be a good landlord. This isn't you have certain political views which make it hard to be a landlord. This is purely a mindset issue. And we see this, I've seen this over and over and over again, and it causes a myriad of problems. But here is the issue. If you have an emotional connection to the property that you're turning into a rental, it will cause you to make mistakes that are 100% avoidable. And I speak from experience on this topic because, as most of you know, I own a property management company. We're coming up on 400 properties that we manage. That's a lot of landlords, a lot of tenants, a lot of problems that we've dealt with in the past. And this is the underlying theme of a lot of those problems. Let's just use as an example. You live in your house, it's your first house you ever bought. Now you're moving up into a better house, or you're moving out of the area, with a job transfer, closer to family or something along those lines. And you're going to take this property that you lived in for, 10, 15, 20 years and turn it into a rental property. It's also the property that you brought Johnny and his sister Laura home from the hospital. It was the first nursery. You made it perfect. You had all their stuff on the walls, those types of things. And you've got a lot of memories built up in this house. And it absolutely is an emotional connection. Putting myself in the same shoes, I have a connection to my house where I raise my daughters as well. But once you turn it into a rental property, you have to turn that connection off. And I'm going to be blunt with you. It's not easy to do because we're humans. It's a natural thing, but it will cause problems for you as a landlord. So how do you do that? That's what we're going to get into in this episode. But before we get into it, I want to give you some of the most common examples of how this causes a problem. So I can, tell you all day long, this is a bad idea for you to do, but if we don't really conceptualize it, it doesn't really mean anything. So first, then I have about 4 or 5 examples, and we're not going to we literally could do a podcast episode on every one of these examples, but we're going to kind of gloss over them because I want to make the point on how this clouds your judgment. So the first one we're going to talk about is lawsuits. This can be a lawsuit from your tenant. This can be a lawsuit from a vendor, but let's just use a tenant as an example. Let's say that the tenant says that there's some issues regarding habitability, like there was some, rat dropping somewhere on the house, or, we live in Southern California, desert area. It's not uncommon to have rodents. And especially if you don't, close up every access hole in the property, eventually at some point you might get mice or rats. Maybe this is something that happened in the past, and this happens to nice properties, bad properties. It makes no difference. I mean, rodents are rodents, right? So, and and this is a very common issue. This has nothing to do with the lifestyle you live or how clean or dirty you are. So we've had properties in the past that have had past rodent infestations. So if you lived at the property and this happened, you call an exterminator out, they come out, they close up all the holes with a screen, they set traps, they kill the rats, they, do their thing. Well, sometimes you don't pay the money to essentially clean them. So this happens a lot in the attic. Attic has a lot of rat droppings. You took care of the problem, but you didn't clean out all the rat droppings because it's very expensive. They rip out all the insulation. They do all this work, thousands of dollars, right? This is just one example. For some reason, the tenants catch wind of this, or I don't know why they would be up there. Let's say they're up there storing some stuff or something along those lines. There's rat droppings up there. Now they're making a claim of this property is not habitable because they got a hold of some attorney who's like feeding them some misinformation. And they say the property has a rat infestation. Well, that is one of the habitability laws in California. You can't have an infestation of rodents. But clearly, you already took care of it. The rodents were fixed when you were living there. There's just some droppings up there. Not a big deal. Well, it can potentially be a big deal if your tenant has an attorney and they want to file a lawsuit against you saying this house isn't habitable, I'm not paying rent, I need this settlement, my kids have health issues, all these things, right? Now, you and I both know that that's probably not what's actually going on, and that they're probably just trying to take advantage of a situation. It doesn't matter though, because in the eyes of the law and the way our criminal justice, not criminal, but the way our legal system is set up, anybody can file a lawsuit for any reason. So tenant gets the lawyer, they file a lawsuit against you, say, hey, this is what, the lawsuit is, pay us basically, which is essentially what they're trying to do. You get connected to the house and go, nope, that's not true. This isn't right. This is ethically wrong. You have your side, they have their side. You're connected to the house. You say, I'm going to, for moral reasons, we're taking this all the way down to a lawsuit, a trial. We're going to be vindicated on this issue. The problem is the legal system is set up. It's not set up in your favor. And if they have an attorney and they go down that path, you're more than likely going to turn this over to your insurance. Your insurance is going to try to settle that claim. Or if you don't want to turn it to your insurance, you're going to try to settle the claim. But if you're emotionally connected and you're so caught up on this is our house and this, how can they disrespect our house and these types of feelings, you're going to lose. The right move in a situation like this is either turn it over to your insurance, let them settle it and move on, or come to some sort of agreement yourself. The wrong thing is to get emotionally invested in what you think is right and wrong, because the legal system is not about right and wrong. It's about what they can get away with and what advantage they can take of the insurance company or you or things along those lines. So that's one extreme example of where if you let your emotional connection to the property and your sense of right and wrong get in the way of a quick exit and a resolution of the property, because the insurance company, all they want to do is write a check to make the problem go away. And from a dollars and cents perspective, that is the right move. So that's the first one. The next time we see the emotional connection to the property is around value and what you think the property should rent for. Because, and this is a scenario, you move out, you hire someone to manage the property, or you try to manage it yourself. You think because it's such a nice house and you spent so much money on those floors and you painted it and all these things you've done over the years, it should rent for X. Let's say you think it should rent for $4,000, but the actual fair market value of the rent is $3,000. Well, you're so caught up in how nice the house is, how much time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears that you put into your house. In your mind, it's totally justified that property should rent for $4,000 a month. Well, the bad news is the open market dictates the price and not your feelings or your emotions tied to price. And the reason this is a mistake is because the property is going to sit vacant and you are going to eat months of rent until you give in to what the open market tells you and you lower the price to what the open market says it should be. That hurts you. And the way that hurts you is 1, 2, 3 months of vacancy at $3,000, you're coming up on $10,000 in loss of rent. Whereas if you would have disassociated yourself from your emotional connection to what you think the property should be worth, and you got it rented out in the first month, you're going to come out ahead. So that is the other big one that we see, this emotional connection causing a big problem for the owner of the property. All right, third one, who you pick to live in the property. So this is a big deal when it comes to fair housing laws. One of the most litigated time periods in a landlord's journey is how they pick the people that they want to live in their property. Because we all know discrimination is bad. We all know discrimination is illegal. However, there are so many protected classes that are out there. The state of California has more than the federal government, that and most people would not say, I only want one race, one sex, X in my property. Nobody in their right mind would do that. However, a lot of these protected classes are more subtle than that. Like, where does their income come from? What is their family makeup? All of these things are protected classes. And if you go, this is my property, this is where I raise my kids, I only want a nice family in there, like the type of family that we were when we moved in, because the neighbors are great and there's a sense of community. So we only want a family, or we only want a working professional couple, or we only want a single person, things like that. That's where you're going to get into a fair housing problem. All it takes is someone to make a complaint against you. The government makes it really easy for people to make complaints. And now, because you had that preconceived idea about who you wanted to live in your property, now you're going to be in for a lot of hurt, because the fair housing investigation is not fun, and it has the potential to end with you writing a big check, which is a problem. So that's another way. The fourth way is in maintenance of the property. So if you're emotionally connected to the property, and this happens many a times, someone moves out of their property and they tell us, everything is fixed. Nothing is going to break on this property. We invested so much money in making sure everything was nice, and they go down the laundry list of all the improvements they've made over the years. Nothing in here can break. It's all brand new. It's all whatever, right? That's not an uncommon thing for a newer landlord to say. Well, tenant moves in, guess what? Something breaks, because everything has a useful life. Everything eventually breaks or needs repair or replacement. If the landlord is so connected to that property and they take such, I don't want to say ownership, but they take such this sense of no one's going to hurt my property because it's mine, they sometimes have a really hard time when something breaks. They want to immediately blame the tenant. Or we had a case recently where a ceiling fan stopped working. And it was, we sent a vendor there, and it was clearly not tenant caused damage, just the ceiling fan stopped working. They have a useful life. Eventually they need to be replaced or repaired. And they couldn't get over the fact that the tenant did this to them. Like, the tenant caused them some sort of pain and suffering because they had to repair the ceiling fan. And why were we not charging the tenant? Because the tenant lives there. This is a mindset that will get you into trouble, because you have an obligation, again, back to our first example, to provide a habitable home. If you start waffling on making certain repairs that the state, of California says are like must do repairs that are related to habitability, again, you're going to find yourself with a tenant lawsuit. So if the property is broken or needs repair, just have it in your mind that you're going to fix it, unless it's obvious tenant damage, and that's a different conversation. But you should expect, which is what we tell our clients, that you should expect to spend roughly 5% of the gross income on repairs. And if you're not spending that, it's potentially a red flag, because across our portfolio, we benchmark these numbers, and that's about what every property it spends on maintenance, is about 5% of the gross rents. Obviously, if you're in a low rent area, that number is going to be higher. And if you're in a $15,000 a month rental, that number is probably going to be lower. But on average in our market, 5% of the repairs of the rent gets spent on repairs. So don't get upset. Don't feel like it's an insult to you that something broke in the property that you think your tenants had something to do with. Most tenants are good, and most landlords are good. And guess what? Things break. Don't let that connection you have to that property cause more headache for you down the road. And finally, the last one, which actually is a really common one, probably should have put it on the first of the list, where we see landlords getting into trouble because of their emotional connection to the property, is with the return of security deposit. And this kind of encompasses a lot of the ones we talked about before, just on a smaller scale. So if you're emotionally connected to that property and something breaks at the property, and maybe it's not discovered till after the tenant moves out, and it's determined to be normal wear and tear, which is a big dispute amongst landlords and tenants. If it's normal wear and tear, we're not charging the tenant security deposit. But if you have this emotional connection to your house and you firmly believe in your heart of hearts that this is the tenant's fault and they need to pay for it, and let's just say that you're managing the property on your own and you do charge the tenant for something that you weren't supposed to, guess what? Your tenant now can go file a small claims lawsuit against you. It's really easy to do. It's really inexpensive for them to do. They don't let attorneys get involved. This happens all the time. And here's what it means for you as the landlord. You have to invest your time and effort to go down to the courthouse. Half the time these cases get extended. We've seen them where they've been extended multiple times. Each time that happens, it's roughly a half to a full day of your time that you have to invest. Average person earns a decent wage. If you own rental property, you can easily calculate, hey, what is my time worth? What do I make in my business? Or what do I get paid in my profession per hour? And when you look at it from that perspective, and now you have to go spend an entire day at the courthouse because they don't give you an exact appointment. They just say, come at this time, and there's 15 other lawsuits in front of you. Is it worth it? Are you so upset over the damage that happened? And usually these kind of deductions are relatively small. It could be $200 to repair something, but if you're willing to invest, 2 entire days, because it takes a fair amount of prep work up front to get all the stuff ready, 2 days of your earned income over a $200 repair because you're so hung up on that almost rarely makes sense. Maybe a different story if we're talking about the entire security deposit and there was malicious damage. That's not what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about those gray areas where you have to weigh the true cost of it. And where we see landlords get in trouble is when they go all in over something small. A light bulb that needed to be changed, or there was a scrape on the floor here, things like that are usually considered normal wear and tear, but you're going to take your tenant down to the final thing where you're standing in front of the judge to make a decision. This is where people get into trouble. It's much easier and more cost effective to go, this is a business I'm in. This is the cost of doing business. So I may or may not have ate a $200 charge, but I have the property back. We get a new renter in there. We continue to pay down our principal. The property continues to depreciate. I don't have to get caught up in all this emotional turmoil related to going to court. That's the right move when it comes to that. So those are 5 examples. Now, what can you do about this? How can you make improvements here? And here's my advice to you. I like to use the analogy of most people have a retirement account of sorts, usually a 401k or an IRA or something along those lines. And most people have them invested in, mutual funds, things like that. So if you have a Roth IRA and you have a mutual fund in there, you're probably not picking up the phone and trying to get a hold of the hedge fund or the mutual fund manager that manages those, billions of dollars in those funds and saying, hey, I have 3 stocks of this, 3 shares of this stock inside your mutual fund. And I'm really upset because I don't like XYZ or what they're doing or things along those lines. Nobody in their right mind does that because they know it's not really possible. You make a decision based on a return. You look at a prospectus. You go, okay, this particular fund, returns 7% on average over the last 10 years. I like that. I like the risk profile. I'm going to put my money in that. And that's where it ends. You don't then become friends with the mutual fund manager and call them every week and ask them a bunch of questions, because this is not how it works and it's not in your best interest. It would be an exercise in futility. Well, you need to look at your rental property in the same manner. Your rental property is no different than a stock in your IRA. It's there to produce a return for you to use for the purposes that you need those returns for, whether it's retirement or income or whatever it is. That's how you need to look at your rental property. And sometimes this is hard to do when you manage it on your own because you're so close to it. You're so connected to the inner workings of it. You're dealing with the tenants, the late pays, the fixing of things. If you put a professional between you and the tenant, and I realize that this seems self-serving because we own a management company, but that is absolutely not the purpose of me using this example. Put somebody in place, a professional who can be that mutual fund manager that does what you hired them to do, but don't get emotionally involved. And that's one way to emotionally disconnect yourself. You have a management company or a portfolio manager, depends on how many rental properties you have, and you let them deal with the day-to-day. And you literally, as the owner of the property, sit back, review the financial statements, make decisions based on the returns you're getting or not getting, and deal with your one party. That's a good way to emotionally disconnect yourself from this property. The other things that helps you do this is if you have a real working budget for the property. This is very uncommon when you own 1 rental property or 2 rental properties. But these large institutional investors, they absolutely have budgets. They have spreadsheets. They are looking at the financial performance of the property. They are not looking at what the tenant in unit 101 said to the tenant in unit 102 and the fight that they got into, or the on-site manager got into a screaming match with one of the tenants. That stuff doesn't happen at that institutional level for the people that are, those asset managers. If those professionals are doing those things, you also should be doing those things. And in real layman's term, here's what it means. You have a rental. It produces $50,000 in rental income for you. You should expect to spend $2,500 a month, or not in a month, a year in repairs. I do that math right? 50,000, 10%, 5,000, 2,500 in repairs. You should expect to save maybe another 5% for capital improvements, because eventually you're going to have to replace the windows. Eventually you're going to have to replace the roof. Eventually appliances are going to go bad. And then the last thing you should definitely be budgeting for is vacancy, because not every tenant is going to stay there. It's unreasonable to think that a tenant is going to stay in your property 100% of the time, 365 days a year for the next 30 years. They are going to come and go. Tenants move in and move out. So you need to save for that. So if you have a good working budget, when you get a vacancy, it's not a big deal. You budgeted for it. There's money sitting in a reserve account. You pay for it. Or when you get an unexpected repair, not a big deal. You have a reserve account. You have X amount, earmarked for replacing large ticket items, or X amount for repairing things. And it happens. It's when you don't properly budget that it's easier to get into this blame game of, oh, well, this is their fault. This isn't my fault, because you don't have the money saved up to handle it. That doesn't happen all the time, but having a good working budget is a good hedge against being emotionally connected and not treating your rental property like a business. So I hope that makes sense. A little bit of a rant. We've been dealing with a few issues surrounding this in our business, and I wanted to just make an episode that talked about it. It's of critical importance that you emotionally disconnect yourself from your rental property. It will make you make bad decisions, and bad decisions in the landlord world only mean one thing: get your checkbook out, because you're going to be paying somebody as a result of the bad decision. Whether it's your tenant in a small claims lawsuit, whether it's your insurance deductible because you got involved in an actual lawsuit that your insurance company settles, whether, it could be any number of things. But I don't like seeing our clients pay some of these consequences over something that is 100% avoidable. I hope that makes sense. Thanks for your listen. Thanks for the time you spent with us. Hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode. I wanted to just take a quick recap of the highlights from it. And the first one is this: being emotionally connected to your property is a weak spot and a mistake for landlords. There's a lot of bad things that come from it. We talked about how it affects lawsuits, how it affects setting the rent price, how it affects picking who rents in the property, how it affects maintenance, how it affects security deposit returns. The solution is to treat your property no different than you treat a stock in a retirement account that you have zero control over. And then the other thing that helps with this is setting and having a rental budget for things that are going to come up, like repairs and vacancy. Hope that was helpful. If you have a rental property and you want to have this conversation with us, we are more than happy to have a conversation with you. Contact us at podcast@rinconmanagement.com. We're more than happy to discuss these issues or see what this looks like if you're looking to get some help with renting out your property. Thanks again for your time. It means a lot to us, and we appreciate you.